Hi, this is Mrs. Warren, and this is the lesson for April 5th, 2018. You will need your spiral and some kind of device, your Chromebook or your phone, to complete this lesson. Now, today the learning target is that you will be able, at the end of this lesson, be able to describe why the Battle of Fort Sumter is significant and important, why the Battle of Antietam is important, which led to the document, the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves in the South. So let's get started. Now this is Fort Moultrie, which is outside of South Carolina. This is in 1860, before any secession, and this is Fort Sumter in the background. And if you look just a year later, how many different things have changed. They're fortifying, they are building sandbags, they have turned their cannons and moved them around to different areas and supplied them with cannonballs. So what does this tell you? That the South is ready for a conflict. They're ready for war. And Fort Sumter in the background is their target. Fort Sumter lies in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, and Fort Sumter is a federal fort. But when South Carolina seceded, they claimed all the land, whether it was federal or not. It was South Carolina's. Now, Abraham Lincoln was in the federal government, was due to supply Fort Sumter. And South Carolina said, look, if you send anything to Fort Sumter, this is going to be looked at as an act of aggression, and there's going to be a fight. But Abraham Lincoln didn't want to back down. That was federal property. But he didn't send any weapons. He sent supplies and whatever they need from the, to continue on as soldiers. Well, as you can imagine, once the supplies were delivered to Fort Sumter, they fired upon Fort Sumter. And the pictures I showed you earlier were from over here, Fort Moultrie. So the first battle begins. Please watch this video. You can stop or pause this video that you're on right now and open another tab and type in this shortened URL. Please make sure of the capital letters so you can get the correct video. Fort Sumter was pretty much destroyed. The Union did surrender, and South Carolina was excited and elated that they won the first battle. Today you can go to Fort Sumter and take a ferry from Charleston. It's a great tour. I've taken it. Part of the fort is still used, or excuse me, is still there. Much of it was destroyed. If you go down into the bunker, there's a great tour with a museum with artifacts and park rangers to ask all kinds of questions. It's a great trip. So the war is on, and things go out, posters go up everywhere calling men to arms, and that war was declared. So Fort Sumter is important because this was the first battle that started the actual fighting. Now, after the Battle of Fort Sumter, we have 4 more southern states seceded, including Virginia. So on page 73, please pause this video and copy down these notes into your notebook. The first land battle was the first Battle of Bull Run, which was outside of a creek called Manassas. So sometimes it will refer to the first Battle of Manassas. And people weren't really, had a realistic view of the war. The North and the South both thought that this would be over in a short amount of time, months, weeks, and that no one would get hurt. Everyone would come back a hero, and it was no big deal. In fact, they were so unrealistic about it. In the photo up above, on the upper right hand side, you see picnickers. They actually drove out to the battle site, set up their picnic, dressed in their Sunday best, and sat down to watch the battle. Of course, they were shocked and horrified when actual battle occurred. Now, the last battle that had taken, or war had taken place, was the Mexican-American War, and it was very far away. So these people really didn't have any idea what war was really like. They just didn't have that experience, or videos or movies as we have today, or books that were written about it. Both the South and the North were shocked by this, and this really started off the idea that this was going to be a long and very bloody war. Now, General Robert E. Lee was a colonel in the American Army and was approached by Lincoln to become the leader of the Union Army. He declined because he was from the state of Virginia, and Virginia seceded after Fort Sumter. And he just couldn't imagine himself leading an army against his home state. So he became the commander of the Confederate Army. Skip a line and write this in your notes. Pause the video. Please go to pause the video, go to this shortened URL, and you'll see how Robert E. Lee refuses command of the Union Army and why he does. This is from the movie Gods in General. As the war progresses, I don't want you to think that we are skipping through, that there are so many few battles. As you can see here on this map, there are dozens and dozens of battles that take place mainly throughout the South. As we talked about strategies and strengths and weaknesses, this was an offensive war. So if you see my arrow, we're moving down. The Union has to go into the South to take out the South to maintain control. So we're going to see most of the battles taking place very close to Washington, D.C. and Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. Washington, D.C. is right on the border of Maryland, and at the time it was called Washington City, as you saw in the film. And Bull Run, the first battle, was just right across the border, so it wasn't very far away. Now I want you to take note of Richmond down here. Richmond is the capital of Virginia today, but it was the capital of the Confederate States of America. And you can see how close they were. So many battles took place in this area in 1861 to 1862, trying to get to the headquarters and the capital of each side. You don't have to write this down. So, after the Battle of Fort Sumter, we got 4 more states that seceded. Skip a line, and this is going to be just kind of an addition to your notes to try to explain how things went. So after the Union forces tried to again advance on Richmond, that was part of the Anaconda Plan. They did not have any success with that. Robert E. Lee and Davis of the South decided that they would make a broad strike and try to defeat the North and invade to Washington, D.C. Now, if this was a victory in the South, the help that they would get from France and Britain would be immeasurable. They would supply them with help and condone and give them the right and recognize them as a country and help them out with money and supplies. But they had to prove themselves. So Lee forces crossed into Maryland, Union territory, and we have our next major battle called the Battle of Antietam. The Battle of Antietam was the bloodiest day in American history. Over 23,000 1,000 men died in 13 hours. It was a horrible death, a horrible amount of deaths on both sides. More men died at the Battle of Antietam than died in the War of 1812, the American Revolution, and the Mexican-American War. Skip a line in your notes on page 73. If you have to go to 75, you're fine. Go to 75. Now, one of the significant things about the Battle of Antietam is that it weakened Lee's army, but it also gave Abraham Lincoln the opportunity to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. His Congress wouldn't condone it because the Union had been doing so badly, but this small victory gave way to Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves of the South in the rebel territories. Pause this video now to take these notes. This concludes part 1 of the lesson. Please proceed to part 2 of the lesson after you have taken the notes.